Another day, another political mess to untangle. Let's do it. When I said mess, I meant it. Turkey and China have been aiding and abetting Russia. Meanwhile, Zelensky presented the Ukrainian peace formula to the world. Russians are cracking down on Mariupol's school children. And the CIA has been rumored to have asked Ukraine to give up 20% of its territory for peace. With that, hi, my name is Yulia and you're watching The Brief, where we talk about everything that happened in and pertaining to Ukraine in the week thus far in under 20 minutes. Let's go. If you have been watching this channel for a while, you know that Turkey finds itself in the international judgment hot waters on its stance on the war in Ukraine quite often. But this time around, we have gotten information that Turkey has not only been making questionable decisions that might not benefit Ukraine, but has quite literally been aiding and abetting Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. Turkish companies sell tens of millions of dollars worth of American electronics, spare parts, and other goods despite the sanctions that have been imposed against the Russian Federation. And when you heard electronics, you immediately thought used in weapons, right? Yeah, that's correct. They could be. Currently, it is known about 13 Turkish companies who have been mixed into such exports. And the value of the goods that they have sold to Russia is a whopping $18 million. And unsurprisingly, another controversial country when we talk about the war in Ukraine, China, according to Wall Street Journal, continues to provide Russia with technology that allows it to continue waging a war against Ukraine. Well, that one's really not surprising, but you know. According to Russian customs data cited by the publication, Chinese state-owned companies have sent such things to Russian state-owned defense structures. Defense enterprises that are under sanctions, might I add. Navigation equipment, jamming devices, and parts of jet fighters. No big deal. Which obviously complicates diplomatic relationships between the US and China, provided that China is spying on the US with a spy ball that Marjorie Taylor Greene is very personally invested in. It looks like China is going to continue supporting Russia and doing what it's been doing. Just a quick reminder to feed the algorithm, because it's hungry. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment. I promise I'll most likely chat with you there. I love interacting with my audience. Subscribe to my channel and don't forget to turn on your notifications. Thank you. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky unveiled the Ukrainian peace formula that he has shown many times before behind closed doors, but now you and I and everybody else in the world can see what it's about. He described a roadmap of the effort on behalf of both Ukrainians and the allies, both on the battlefield and on the home front. Real substantial commitments on the part of allies are crucial for the success of this peace plan. Its implementation most likely means that Europe is going to have to reform its security structure. I'm going to show you some of the points that I think are the most important, and if you want to hear all 10 peace formula points, I'm going to leave the link to the United 24 video in the description below.
Item 3. Energy safety. Ukraine should get air defense systems for protection of its energy infrastructure. The United Nations can send its experts to Ukrainian facilities to examine the damage that has already been done. Item 4. Exchange of prisoners on an all-for-all basis. Hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers are held in inhumane conditions. It has to end. Moreover, the departed civilians, children, and adults must be returned. Item 5. Restore the respect for the United Nations Charter. The United Nations General Assembly deplored the Russian invasion and condemned attempted illegal annexations of Ukraine's lands. Russia must confirm the territorial integrity of Ukraine according to the United Nations Charter. Item 6. Full withdrawal of Russian forces. The Russian Federation must withdraw its troops. Ukraine's borders should be under the control of Ukraine. including Donbass and Crimea.
And this is what the president of the European Council, Charles Michel, had to say about it. The EU and Ukraine have a common goal: to end the war, which will be based on respect for that sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. That is why we support the Ukrainian peace formula, and we will work together on the implementation of the 10 points at the Initiative Summit. What do you guys think? Do any of them include anything that you didn't know needs to happen for the peace to last? Europe's reaction to the formula is not the only thing that Ukraine has to celebrate this weekend. Today, we returned our defenders in one of the largest POW exchanges since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. We managed to return 116 of our people, defenders of Mariupol, Kherson partisans, snipers from the Bakhmut direction, and other heroes of ours, 87 soldiers of the armed forces. In addition, the bodies of dead foreign volunteers Christopher Matthew Perry and Andrew Tobias Matthew, as well as the body of a dead volunteer soldier, a Ukrainian who served in the French Foreign Legion, Yevhen Kulik, were returned to Ukraine. And all of those fighters are currently being attended to by medical staff. Preliminarily, their condition is unsatisfactory, which means long-term treatment and rehabilitation lie ahead of them. And just to illustrate to you how dire their condition really is, here is a video of a Ukrainian serviceman, according to him, eating fresh fruit for the first time in 11 months.
За рік їм свіжий фрукт. Це навіть страшно. Смачного.
Imagine what have had to happen to you to be this happy to eat an apple. Andriy Yermak noted that the preparation for this exchange has lasted more than a month. So many structures were involved in it, including people directly subordinate to the office of the President Volodymyr Zelensky. The state has the opportunity to provide the necessary support and assistance. Of course, it is necessary to ensure the meeting of the soldiers with their relatives, and then, if necessary, decide on the issue of going abroad for treatment. And here is another story that I want to share with you that's both inspiring and terrifying, that is somewhat related to Russian captivity. This is Vasa, a dog that served in the reconnaissance of the Marines. While fulfilling a mission at the front near enemy positions, he got entangled into a wire and fell into the trap. He didn't want to end up in captivity so much, he bit off his own paw, and on the 3 that were left, returned back to Ukrainian positions. He was promptly bandaged by our soldiers and evacuated to safety, from where he was delivered to Poland, and now he received a prosthetic leg. And he's going to stay there for a little while for further treatment. And I hope this story really inspired you, because I very often talk about the bravery of Ukrainian people, but it's really the stories of Ukrainian animals, creatures that have no consciousness of what war is, doing things like this, that really makes me fall in love with my country all over again every day. And in the spirit of fighting, Zelensky said that no one will surrender Bakhmut, and we will fight as long as we can. And then the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov, shed some light at the Ukraine-EU summit on exactly how we're planning on continuing this fight. A tank coalition with the main tanks of NATO countries is needed for a counteroffensive. That is, we will use them as a steel first to break through their, Russians, defense line when these corps are ready. And hopefully those Bradleys, Leopards, Abrams, Challengers will really show the Russians what we've got. And speaking of them, meanwhile in Russia. Russian artillery shelled Kherson again. Yeah, remember that city that Russians were saying is part of the Russian world and Russian land and they would never harm it because they just want to liberate the people in there? Yeah, that city. They shelled it again. And here are the photos of the consequences of what happened there. If this is how Russians care, I really don't want to find out how they don't. Well, actually, wait a second. This is how they don't. According to the New York Times, in the 11 months of the full-scale invasion, Russia lost 200,000 soldiers, killed and wounded. They suffered particularly significant losses during the battles for Bakhmut and Soledar, but of course this is not a deterrent for Putin. The article writes this: he's ready for hundreds of thousands of victims in Ukraine, although a larger number may undermine his political support. Moscow has always thrown into battle people it considered expendable, in particular during the Second World War. Who do they not consider expendable? And despite all of that, the Kremlin is once again overestimating the capabilities of the Russian army in the new major offensive against Ukraine. The Institute for the Study of War had found no evidence that Russians had regained significant or sufficient combat power to defeat the Ukrainian forces in the east of Ukraine and capture more than 11,300 square kilometers of the land in Donbass by March. And a note from me is that provided all of the weapons transfers that Ukraine is awaiting, they're going to have a very hard time moving up an inch. According to those State Duma officials, NATO symbols on toys need to be depicted in such a manner that Russian children are urged to deal with them with the help of Russian tanks. Do you have a comment to that? Because I don't. Oh, and to help actual Russians on the battlefield deal with NATO, North Korea is going to send their police officers to the occupied territories as police workers and as military personnel. So far it's going to be 300 to 500 people, but if they do stellar, they're going to increase that amount. I wonder what's gonna happen when these North Koreans that have been cooped up inside of that dictatorship with no internet, no technology, and no anything reach Ukraine and start seeing washing machines, phones, and wireless headphones like Russians did before. I wonder if they're gonna start running away and asking for asylum in Ukraine. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing, but I'm laughing because I really see that as a real possibility.
It's really scary out there.
Yeah, super duper scary.
Be careful.
Okay, good. You got me?
I got you.
Okay.
I will not drop
Yeah,
you.
just don't drop
I
me.
got you. I got.
And starting on Monday, Russian occupation forces are going to oblige Ukrainian heads of schools to check Ukrainian kids' phones every day for presence of pro-Ukrainian materials on them. There have been lots of data leaks coming out of Mariupol, and Russians can't find the source of them. So the assumption is that they think that parents have been using their children's phones to transmit data to Ukrainian authorities and the armed forces of Ukraine, which should by itself tell you that these people don't want to be part of the Russian world like Russians claim, but I digress. Oh, and they're also banning all non-Protestant and non-Russian Orthodox churches in Mariupol, and the process of the confiscation of their properties has already begun because, you know, obviously you can't go to any church unless it's the cult of the Russian world, because how else are they gonna zombify you and brainwash you? And it also became known that Russian occupation forces are now using prisoners from Ukrainian penal colonies on occupied territories to recruit them for the war in Ukraine, just like they do in Russia. Over the past week, 50 women from the colony in Snizhne have joined the ranks of the Russian forces, and now they're undergoing training on the territory of the Russian Federation. Because of course they can't recruit honest Ukrainians to serve for them, they have to search out criminals wherever they go. And speaking of criminals, I'm going to show you a video account of a Russian soldiers describing their war crimes on the territory of Ukraine, and it is incredibly heavy, so here is my warning, just keep that in mind.
Konstantin was a senior lieutenant in the Russian army, but he's fled Russia, and he's agreed to tell me about crimes he says he saw Russian soldiers committing in Ukraine.
The Ukrainian had a blindfold on. The colonel put a pistol to the prisoner's forehead and said, "I'm going to count to 3 and then shoot you in the head." He counted and then fired just to the side of his head, on both sides. The colonel started shouting at him. I said, "Comrade Colonel, he can't hear you. You've deafened him." The interrogations, this torture, continued for about a week, every day, at night, sometimes twice a day.
If you want to watch the whole thing, I'll leave a link in the description of this video to the interview done by BBC. While it feels really wrong to move on to the next topic, there really isn't a good buffer that anyone could come up with to insert between this and what's next. So I advise, if you need a moment to process what you have just heard, please just put the video on pause, and I, in the meanwhile, will move on to international affairs. A rumor started by a Swiss publication has been flying around that during CIA head's visit to Kyiv was offered to seize 20% of Ukrainian territory in order to achieve peace with Russia. In mid-January, President Joe Biden sent the head of the CIA to Ukraine and Russia on a mission to investigate the readiness of both parties to negotiate. And that's where the offer allegedly took place. And allegedly, both parties refused. I mean, if someone were to offer this to Ukraine again, that would be a huge slap in our faces. This week, both the director of the CIA and the White House denied these allegations and called the report by the Swiss publication simply inaccurate. They said that they did not ask Ukraine to seize its territories for the sake of peace. And I, for one, really hope that it's true, because I really don't want to regress back to that conversation, and I really don't want to have to explain to the world again why this is an absolutely incredibly tone-deaf and horrifying offer to make. Meanwhile, to further show their support for Ukraine, 40 countries will oppose Russia's participation in the 2024 Olympics. Those countries include the US, who, following the example of Poland and Latvia, called on the non-admission of Russian and Belarusian athletes to the Olympic Games. And of course, Estonia and Lithuania followed suit. And Lithuania, oh, you guys in Lithuania. We'll talk about it in a second, but for now, Dmytro Kuleba had a response to the Olympic Committee. Their decision was to allow Russians and Belarusians to compete only under a white flag. Russia won 71 medals in Tokyo Olympics. 45 of them were won by athletes who are also members of the Central Sports Club of the Russian Army, the army that commits atrocities, kills, assays, and loots. This is whom the ignorant IOC wants to put under white flag, allowing to compete. The efforts of the IOC to sweep Russian war crimes under the rug is a testament to how far the Olympic gods have become detached from reality. The IOC is willing to trample on the graves of thousands of innocent people who have been and are being killed by Russians. The only white flag that Russians should bring is one to Ukrainian battlefield. And to show just how ready the world is to cut Russia out of international affairs, Andrzej Duda, the president of Poland, said that he's ready to build an iron curtain from heavens to here to keep the Russian Federation out. Let Russia keep its Russian peace if they like it. We don't like it. Well, no one does, Andrzej. No one does. Except for the Olympic Committee. They seem to very much like it. And then a huge event happened in the United States. The US Attorney General Merrick Garland authorized the transfer of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine for the first time in history. We are talking about $5.4 million seized from the Russian oligarch Malafeyev. And according to the Attorney General, those funds will be transferred to the State Department to be spent on supporting the people of Ukraine. And then Lithuania made another contribution to our people. They have raised 1 million euros for radars for Ukraine in 1 hour. Then their IT company, Tesanet, decided to double that amount. And last time I checked, the fundraiser was up to $5 million. Lithuania, thank you. You always come through for us, and you always do these incredible, incredible things. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. You are the best allies anybody could ask for. Karto iki pergales? I really hope I said that right. And to conclude, I'll quote the CIA Director William Burns, the one who has been allegedly offering Ukraine to seize its territories. The landing of the arrogance of the President of the Russian Federation and his understanding that he not only cannot capture new territories, but can lose already occupied ones. Now Putin is betting on time. He still believes that he will be able to turn the tide of the war primarily because political fatigue will set in Europe and the US will divert its attention. That's exactly what Putin is hoping for. He knows that he can't win the war militarily, so he wants to exhaust the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian military, and the support of the world. Attention spans tend to fade. People tend to lose interest. So I am begging you, please, don't let his dreams get fulfilled. Continue screaming about the atrocities in Ukraine. Continue pressuring your politicians for help. And first and foremost, continue asking them to send more modern weapons. With that, that's all I have for you for today, and I'm happy that we are ending on a positive note. You know the drill. If you enjoyed this video or found it informative, please, please, please help me fight Russian disinformation and give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to turn on all of your notifications. They're so important because of course you don't want to miss the next video when it comes out. And as always, check your sources and don't fall for propaganda. And I will see you next time.